Hey, did you know Birdo is trans? Isn't that kind of neat? Gaming Lit 101, baby. For real though, Birdo is a trans woman, an identity that's been tied to the character since her first appearance in 1988. But if you didn't know that, don't worry, you're not alone. Nintendo has had a really weird relationship with Birdo, and doesn't seem to know what to do about it. I think it all comes down to the way that her trans identity was handled in Super Mario Bros. 2, since, believe it or not, her representation was not handled particularly well back then, and has sort of not been handled well ever since. In the booklet that came with the game, back when that was still something that happened, side note, I miss those. Birdo was introduced in the list of enemy characters with a description that reads, Birdo. He thinks he is a girl, and he spits eggs from his mouth. He'd rather be called Birdetta. This description has kind of stuck with me. It makes me feel really gross in the way that bigotry often does, because it happily disrespects someone else's wishes twice in just 19 words. He thinks he is a girl. What a horribly invalidating sentence. This is the sort of language that transphobes have always used and continue to use today as a way of discrediting trans people by saying they just think they're a man or a woman, with an implied, but actually they're not. But actually they're confused. But actually someone not inside their brain, know the truth about their gender. Birdo prefers she. I will call her he. What a dick. The description goes on to give us Birdo's real name, Birdetta, which I'll be calling her from here on out. Despite saying that she wants to be called Birdetta, Nintendo leads its description of its brand new character and mini-boss by dead-naming her. What's the point of doing this? Of devoting the entirety of Birdetta's description to disrespecting her? I think the answer is actually quite simple. Nintendo created Birdetta simply to mock her, to give her an identity and strip it away as a cruel joke. A joke that's been made at the expense of trans people over and over and over again throughout history and still today. This is something we have to grapple with when it comes to trans representation, since all too often, trans characters are created to be mocked for audiences to see and presumably laugh and point at, as if it's so far-fetched and ludicrous. It's not a great start for having solid trans characters in games and other media, but it's frequently as good as it gets when trans representation is so sparse. We kind of have to take what we can get. Birdetta went on to be mocked some more, with her character having a deep masculine voice in Japanese commercials, and in a game called Captain Rainbow, published by Nintendo, by having her be in jail for trying to use the women's bathroom. Very cool, guys. Thanks for policing the bathrooms and preventing this woman from just trying to shit in peace. We've got war criminals like Bowser walking around as a free man, able to participate in fucking golf tournaments. Congratulations on being so true to life, it's almost embarrassing. Nintendo has largely stopped mocking Birdetta, and it seems to be widely accepted at this point that she's a girl and Yoshi's girlfriend. But it's just a shame that her origins had to be so deeply complicated and upsetting. Here's a curveball. Birdetta isn't the only trans woman in the Mario series. Vivian from Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door is trans in several versions of the game, with her Japanese description translating to, one of the Shadow Group, Vivian appears to be a girl, but is really a boy. Are you fucking kidding me? Again? Okay. Despite the poor description, Nintendo is actually a lot kinder to Vivian than it was to Birdetta by using exclusively female pronouns to describe her. She does face bigotry from her sisters over her identity, but the game portrays this as wrong and mean, and her sisters are enemies that you go on to take down later on in the game. People have complicated feelings about it, but similar to Birdetta, many trans people look at Vivian as an icon. Alright, let's address something real quick. I am a cis man, so it's not really for me to say definitively whether or not specific trans representation is good or bad. That's not to say that there's no way for me or any other cis person to know if something is a harmful stereotype, like just be empathetic and use your brain, you know? But what I'm getting at is that just because a character like Birdetta was created to mock trans people, doesn't mean that they can't reclaim her as an icon, which many already have. Representation, however, is tricky. I can't tell you how to feel about nuanced trans characters, so we look to trans writers and game critics like Stacey Henley, Jade King, Carolyn Petit, and Riley MacLeod, to name just a small few. But here's the thing. As is the case with all groups of people, there is no trans masthead. No one can speak for everyone, and different trans people are going to feel differently about representation. For example, while many fans look at Birdetta as a trans icon, others find her trans identity to be frustrating. Stacey Henley even described her as being untrans, since outside of her origins and subsequent mockings, Nintendo hasn't given Birdetta the trans label, and it seems like the company just wants everyone to forget about the entire thing and see her as a cis lady dinosaur. What I'm getting at here is that representation is complicated. It seems like there's no perfect way to do it, but there certainly are wrong ways to do it, and unfortunately, many games fumble the depictions of their trans characters in one way or another. For example, people have gone back and forth on the trans representation in The Last of Us Part 2 with Lev. On one side of the argument, it's nice to see a trans man break free from the confines of his oppression and get to live his life outside of the bigoted world he was raised in. On the other side of it, he's dead-named during an encounter in the game, which, while that's something that certainly happens to trans people, there's an entire other conversation surrounding whether or not dead-naming should be included in trans media in the first place. While it's good to go back and forth on the nuances of trans representation in gaming, what I'm happy about is that those conversations are happening at all, because it means that trans people are actually in games. I recently played a bit of Tell Me Why as research for this video, and I found it to be completely refreshing. If you haven't played it, it's a story-driven game by Don't Nod, creators of Life is Strange, that follows a trans man and his sister as they reconnect and come to terms with their relationship with their dead, abusive mother. What makes Tell Me Why so nice is that it's not afraid of its trans character. Tyler openly identifies as trans, which is a detail that's central to the events of the game. There is no ambiguity surrounding his identity that can be ignored or pushed aside, as is the case with plenty of other trans characters. Stacey Henley, can you tell that I like her writing, touches on this very topic in an article on The Gamer titled "Games Need to Stop Being Afraid of the Word Transgender." She argues that while there has been plenty of progress made with trans representation in gaming, so many games with trans characters tiptoe around flat out saying that someone is trans. She writes, "There's perhaps understandable reluctance given how heavy-handed Mass Effect Andromeda was with its trans character Hanley Abrams, leading to heavy backlash. But there needs to be some more bravery involved in these depictions." I like that idea of asking studios to be brave with their representation, because it matters. Cue the people asking a single-worded question. Why? Why does it matter? First of all, it's 2 questions, and a total of 5 words, but I know what you're trying to ask. Let's talk about it. So, the big why. If you're asking why trans representation is necessary in gaming, you've probably had a lot of conflicting opinions with the other stuff I've said in this video. If that's you, thanks for sticking around and hearing me out, but there are a million reasons why representation matters, many of which I'm sure you can intuit on your own or have already been explained to you. Seeing yourself on screen, playing a game where you feel seen, all of those things matter to trans people, in the same way that it matters to cis people. We just get an infinite amount of the kinds of games that we see ourselves in. There's another key aspect to it, though, that exists outside of being able to simply see yourself represented in a game. I think it's reason enough to include trans characters in games so that trans people can feel included. But for the sake of this weird, apathetic argument, let's say that for whatever reason, that didn't matter to me as a cis person. I still think it's worth being exposed to the experiences of people that are different from me. There's this mindset that I've seen lately when it comes to addressing people who are opposed to things like the representation of minority groups in gaming that boils down to, if you don't like it, don't play it. But I would push back on that. If you don't like it, I implore you to play it. If you do, you just might find yourself becoming a more empathetic person who gains a new understanding of a person you might not have thought you had anything in common with. I've heard people say things like, I don't care if there's trans characters in a game or not. I just don't want it crammed down my throat. But like, did you hear what you just said? Sounds like you do care if there are trans characters, since anytime a game has trans people in them, grifters lose their minds.
Fucking pronouns! Fucking gender ambiguity!
You get YouTube thumbnails that are like, Insomniac went woke, when it's just like the most non-confrontational representation possible. Here's a little secret that I'll let you in on. A character's identity matters because it informs us of their entire world. There's no singular trans experience, but we know many of the broad experiences that trans people have simply for being trans. The same can be said for any group of people. Diverse characters tell diverse stories, and that's a good thing. To quote a headline by Kayla Chadwick for HuffPost that speaks for itself, I don't know how to explain to you that you should care about other people. Here's another cool thing about gaming and representation. It helps us understand ourselves more. For many trans people, the character creation menus in a lot of video games did some pretty heavy lifting in helping them understand their gender identity. The ability to actually create trans characters by choosing pronouns separately from a created character's body is something that's a pretty recent addition to AAA gaming. But when it comes to character creators, players have had the option to choose whichever gender they prefer for as long as it's been an option, regardless of the gender that you, the player, are. This is actually a pretty interesting and useful tool for experimenting with one's gender. Video games are a safe space where people can try on different hats and identities, and the ability to experiment with those things gives people the chance to know themselves better. This has even helped trans people come out and realize that they're trans in the first place. To be honest, it just really warms my heart and shows that games matter and can change people's lives. What's also cool about character creators is that they let anyone experiment with their gender. It's not just relegated to trans folks. I've personally come to realize that one day I want to get really good at doing eye makeup, since I've always spent some time in a character creator looking at whichever eyeshadows express the moody vibe that I'm going for with my character. I'm not trans, but in playing around with the character creator in games like Baldur's Gate 3 or Cyberpunk or whatever, I've discovered new ways to express my own gender. Side note, if you can teach me how to do tasteful eye makeup, let me know in the comments. We'll chat. Now, this is a whole other conversation that plenty of people have already talked about, but games also provide people with a place to experiment with more than just their gender identity. Plenty of games give you the option to experiment with your sexuality as well by providing romanceable characters of all genders and sexualities. Alright, take note, games still have a long way to go when it comes to fully embracing all aspects of the gender and sexuality spectrums, but at the very least, they do provide players with a space to try different things out. And hey, if you've never experimented around in a game, then I'd recommend you give it a shot. There's always room for us to learn more about ourselves and our relationship with our gender, and video games are a really great, safe place to do that experimentation. So let's return to Birdetta. As I've covered, there's a lot that's been said about her and her representation. Some people really like her and her relationship with her transgender identity, but it's not so simple for others. So what do trans people want out of their representation? Well, you're obviously asking the wrong person, but I can point you in the right direction for a solid answer. Carolyn Petit wrote a long analysis of Tell Me Why that I think is really worth checking out if you're interested in the nuances of trans representation, since it discusses Tell Me Why and The Last of Us 2. It's linked in the description below. The blog post hosted on Medium is titled Tell Me Why and the Limits of Positive Trans Representation, and it does a really good job talking about how, even though Tyler's transness is put front and center in the game, and he was written with a clear amount of care and research, the fact that he's kind of flawless makes him a little too sterile to be relatable to trans people. It left Petit wanting more out of trans representation in gaming. She writes, I believe that stories that illuminate trans experience are extremely important. As I said, I felt a personal connection to Tyler's fears about being seen and loved, and I felt my own heart yearning for the experience of being validated and desired the way he is in Michael's eyes. But I worry that a desire to offer up positive trans representation in the mainstream space may result in a parade of trans characters who share a similar arc or fit a similar mold, when what we really need, in addition to stories that confront the realities of trans experience with far more realism and honesty than either of these games do, are stories in which trans people aren't defined by their transness. I want trans action heroes, trans rom-com leads, trans people dealing with workplace drama or other mundane shit that has nothing to do with them being trans. All of it. I want trans characters who internalize the hate of a hostile world and who struggle with feelings of guilt about being who they are before learning to love and accept themselves and finding love and acceptance with others. But I also want depictions of trans characters who never internalize the hate of a hostile world because they don't live in one, or because they grow up so loved and validated that such hate has never had the chance to work its way inside them. Doesn't that sound nice? I want to play a game like that. I set out to write a little video where I got to share a niche piece of gaming lore. Hey, did you know Birdo is trans? Isn't that kind of neat? And then after starting my research, I discovered that turns out I knew jack fucking squat about it. What I thought I knew about Birdetta and her relationship to her gender identity was pretty incomplete. And if I presented everything as I understood it just last week to you now, I think I'd be pretty embarrassed if I ever found out a single other detail about her and her history with representation and how trans people feel about it. I think this sort of thing happens to all of us from time to time, but take this as a reminder that, hey, you should do your research before you speak on something. What's just as crucial as doing the research itself, however, is actually listening to it and learning from it. Representation is complicated, but it's always good to see people trying. Play Tell Me Why. Play Celeste. Play The Last of Us 2, Apex Legends, Night in the Woods, Undertale, and fucking Monster Prom. Trans stories need to be told and should be experienced by you and me and everyone. Protect trans kids. Like and subscribe. Class dismissed.